Informed Choice Radio, episode 176. What happens to my pension when I die?
From Sundial House Studios in Cranley, welcome to Informed Choice Radio. This is the podcast all about achieving your financial goals in life. Here's your host, Martin Bamford.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Informed Choice Radio. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I'm Martin Bamford, your host for this podcast. I'm a chartered financial planner, chartered wealth manager, and personal finance author. This is a podcast from Informed Choice, an award-winning firm of chartered financial planners in Cranley, Surrey. Here at Informed Choice, we help you to achieve your financial goals in life and make those important decisions with confidence. That's what this podcast, Informed Choice Radio, is all about. You can find out more about the podcast, listen to our entire back catalogue of episodes, and find the show notes for this episode at icradio.co.uk. This week on the show, I'm talking about what happens to your pension when you die. But before that, here's a roundup of the latest personal finance news. Price inflation has risen to its highest rate for 2.5 years. Annual inflation, as measured by the Consumer Prices Index, CPI, reached 1.8% in the year to January, up from 1.6% in December. According to the ONS, the rise in inflation was mainly the result of the rising price of fuel. It is the fourth consecutive month CPI inflation has risen, and it means inflation has reached its highest since June 2014. Wages grew faster than the rate of inflation at the end of 2016, according to the latest official figures. Wages grew 2.6% on an annualised basis in the 3 months to December. That's according to the Office for National Statistics. It slowed from the 2.8% rate seen in the 3 months to November. The ONS also said the jobless rate held steady at an 11-year low of 4.8%. Average incomes for pensioner households after housing costs now exceed those of working-age people. Pensioner households are now £20 a week better off than working-age households, but were £70 a week worse off back in 2001. The new report from the Resolution Foundation also found pensioners are more likely than their predecessors to be working, own a home, and have generous private pensions. UK consumers are leaving over £1 billion to sit idle in current accounts. Research by CompareTheMarket.com suggests that as much as £1.2 billion could be lying untouched nationwide in zombie accounts, as consumers forget about the old accounts they no longer use. Over 1 in 3 Brits have multiple accounts, yet almost half of these say that they only use one of these day to day. With 49 million people using current accounts in the UK, this means that around 8 million accounts are sitting unused. With each of these accounts holding an average of £141, this equates to £1.2 billion across the UK. Research from Co-op Insurance has revealed that 91% of homeowners think their house value has increased since they bought it by an average of £33,125. The study, which questioned 1,000 UK homeowners, has found that 31% of homeowners bought their property with their eye firmly on how much money they could make from their investment. Of these, a reliance on house prices increasing generally was the main way homeowners were hoping this would happen. Today on the podcast, I'm talking about what happens to your pensions when you die. And I know it's a morbid subject, but it is really so important. Our pensions are usually the second biggest asset in our lives after the value of our homes. So from a financial perspective, it's really important we take them quite seriously, both during our lifetime and also when planning for our death in the future. So I'm talking about this subject today because there was a recent Supreme Court ruling about pension death benefits, and it marks a major extension of unmarried cohabitees' rights, which could affect millions of families. So in this episode, I'm going to start by taking a look at that Supreme Court ruling and what it means for unmarried couples in particular. Then look at pension death benefits more generally. I'll also look at some action steps you should consider to get your own pensions in order from that perspective of death benefits, planning for the worst in the future. Starting then with the Supreme Court ruling. This was the case of a lady called Denise Brewster from Northern Ireland, whose partner Lenny McMullen was a member of Northern Ireland's local government pension scheme for 15 years. Denise and Lenny had been living together for 10 years. They got engaged to be married on Christmas Eve in 2009, but sadly on Boxing Day, just 2 days later, he died suddenly and unexpectedly. Northern Ireland's local government pension scheme needed unmarried members to complete a nomination form before any cohabiting partners, unmarried partners, could be entitled to any death benefits from the pension scheme. Now, Lenny hadn't made this nomination for Denise, and as a result, she was initially denied any death benefits from the pension scheme when he died. The reason this case went all the way to the Supreme Court was that lawyers acting for Denise claimed it was disproportionate and in effect discriminatory to require unmarried cohabiting partners to complete a nomination form. And that's because married couples didn't need to fill in the same form in order to secure those valuable pension death benefits. In their unanimous judgment, the 5 Supreme Court justices said that the requirement for a nomination form should be removed from the pension scheme. Kate Smith, who is head of pensions at Aegon, commented on the ruling and said, increasingly, couples cohabit rather than getting married or entering a civil partnership. This week's case should act as a prompt to both public and private pension sector pensions to make sure they're clear on savers or retirees' beneficiaries. In the meantime, however, there are some simple steps that people can take to make sure their wishes are followed, such as checking you've nominated a beneficiary and checking any rules that govern this process. So this Supreme Court ruling is potentially very good news for unmarried couples who are cohabiting, who are members of local government pension schemes, because it removes that requirement to fill in a simple form in order to ensure pension death benefits are paid. However, there has been some chatter this week among the pension geeks, which suggests that the ruling, which quotes the first protocol of the 2009 European Convention on Human Rights, might not automatically apply to all public sector pension schemes. When it comes to pension death benefits, I think it's better to be safe than sorry. So look, many thousands of pounds are potentially at stake here. Rather than relying on either the goodwill of the pension scheme trustees, administrators, or either that or an expensive court battle, I think you just take some proactive steps and get this right for yourself and your family. Don't leave anything to chance when it comes to this. Aegon have quite helpfully suggested 4 key issues to consider when it comes to pension death benefits. So I'll work through these now. Number 1 is to nominate your beneficiaries. They say the simplest way to make sure your partner or loved one is entitled to benefits is just to name them as a beneficiary. So when you initially join a pension scheme, you'll usually be asked to sign a form stating what you wish to happen to your pension in the event of your death. For some pension schemes, if you're not married or in a civil partnership, the survivor's pension is payable at the discretion of the pension trustee. But it has to be said that making your wishes known, making them crystal clear at outset, will increase the chances that that discretion will act in the favour of your partner. Aegon also points out, of course, that if you join a pension scheme at a younger age, you may not yet have a beneficiary in mind. So it's important to then come back to that form at a later date and make sure your paperwork is in order. You can update your nomination at any time. You just need to contact your scheme or pension provider. So number 1, nominate your beneficiaries. It really is a simple form, and it's one of those forms that can save an awful lot of cost, expense, heartache, stress for your family or survivors in the future. So please do take that advice and nominate the beneficiaries from your pension scheme. Number 2, Aegon suggests you ask about the scheme rules, the pension scheme rules. This is about finding out whether there's any pension scheme rules which limit to whom the survivor's pension can be paid. Some pension schemes can set out a specified time for cohabiting couples to be entitled to a survivor's pension. I have to say, in my experience, I've not come across that too often, but just check the scheme rules. Pension schemes publish their scheme rules in a simple booklet. Any pension scheme member can ask for a copy of the scheme rules. Your advisor can ask for a copy with your permission. Just check it out. Find out if there's any caveats, any restrictions on who you can nominate pension death benefits to. If there is a specified time for cohabiting couples, just make sure you're aware of it so it doesn't come as a nasty surprise for the surviving partner at a later date. So ask about the scheme rules. Number 3 is all about pension freedoms. Now, pension freedoms were, of course, introduced in April 2015, and they have resulted in a fairly significant change in the way in which defined contributions, so money purchase pensions, pension pots, can be passed on in the event of your death. And prior to those freedoms, most people had simply, at retirement, bought an annuity, a financial instrument designed to convert the capital value of the pension pot into a guaranteed income for life. And unless they built in some death benefits to that annuity, some spouse's income or a dependent's pension, there were no further payments on their death. So anything had to be bought into the annuity in terms of pension death benefits. However, since the pension freedoms were introduced in 2015, I've got to say annuities are becoming a less popular option at retirement. More people are now choosing to take their pension benefits more flexibly through something called pension drawdown. And with pension drawdown, any pension pot that's left over when you die can be passed on, in many cases tax-free, to any nominee. So if you die before age 75, you've got that option to pass on remaining pension pot value tax-free and very flexibly to any nominee. If you die after age 75 generally, then the person you nominate to receive your pension pot, the remaining pension pot, will pay their tax on it, but they'll pay it at their normal rate of income tax, or a nominal tax rate. It's still really important you nominate who you would like to receive any unused pension funds, so don't take that for granted simply because you're taking a flexible approach to retirement. And actually, I've got to say, as well as nominating a beneficiary during your working lifetime when you're contributing to a pension pot, when you retire and make some choices and options about your pension benefits, how you'd like to receive cash and income, that's a really good prompt, I think, to go in and update any nomination forms. Even if you believe you've already nominated somebody in the past whilst you're accumulating your pension, please do just complete a new form. Submit a new form at the time you take retirement benefits. It's better to be safe than sorry when it comes to this stuff. Number 4 is to make a will. Having a will in place generally ensures that there's a good process for dividing your estate in the event of your death. It's all about expressing your wishes, getting it in writing, getting it officially made with a solicitor, and making sure that when you die in the future, that everybody knows what your intentions were, what your wishes were. Now, although pensions don't normally form a part of your estate without a will, your estate is governed by the rules of intestacy if you don't have a will, and that can be very prescriptive. It can cause significant delays in settling the value of your estate, and it can also result in the value of your estate or property or other cash and assets investments being allocated to somebody that you probably didn't want to receive it. So dying without a will, dying intestate as it's known, is a really bad idea. Getting a will is so straightforward. Please don't do a DIY will, because they just tend to result in very expensive probate in the future. You have to go and get expert advice to unpick all the mistakes that were made. Go and see a solicitor, spend a few £100s, get a will professionally made, and think about what your wishes are. Now, cohabiting couples don't currently benefit from the intestate rules. So if you die without a will as a cohabiting couple, you don't benefit from intestacy. So in that case, if you're an unmarried cohabiting couple, it's so important that both partners make a will, and if it's your intention, name each other as beneficiaries. So make a will is tip number 4. So just run through those tips very quickly again. Tip number 1 was to nominate your beneficiaries, fill in that nomination form. Tip number 2 was to ask about the scheme rules, and that's about awareness. Just check there's no sort of quirky bits within the pension scheme. Number 3 was to be considerate of the new pension freedoms, particularly if you're taking your pension in a more flexible way using pension drawdown. And number 4 is make a will. It's really important for unmarried couples, but it's still important for married couples. Make a will. Go and see a solicitor, get one done. These are really good tips from Aegon, and I think they can be applied equally well to different types of pensions out there. So defined benefit pensions, also known as final salary pensions, from either the public or private sector, but also defined contribution pension pots, either from company pension schemes or private pensions like a personal pension. So all 4 of those tips can be applied equally as well. do keep in mind that that recent Supreme Court ruling, which I started this segment by talking about, was specifically about the public sector defined benefit pension in Northern Ireland, this Northern Ireland local government pension scheme. So it probably, in the short term at least, doesn't change anything for unmarried cohabiting couples who have got private sector defined benefit pensions, any that are still left. I know there's not too many out there anymore, or pension pots, defined contribution pensions. So don't rely on that Supreme Court ruling to think, oh, it will all be okay. I read about something in the paper the other day that said, if I'm not married but I didn't nominate, then I'd get the money anyway. Get the nomination done anyway, please. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. You can leave me a voicemail via our website at icradio.co.uk. You can email me at martin@icfp.co.uk, or you can get in touch on Twitter, where you'll find me at Martin Bamford. I really would love to hear from you. If you enjoy listening to Informed Choice Radio, please do take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes. It only takes a minute. Visit icradio.co.uk/iTunes. That will take you straight to our page. Follow the link to ratings and reviews and leave us a review there, and we will, of course, read it out in a future episode. That's all for this week. I hope it's been useful. Stay tuned, please, for the after show that comes up right after the following music. That's where I talk about what we've been up to here at Informed Choice. So until next time, I've been Martin Bamford, and this has been Informed Choice Radio. And remember, when it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow. Welcome to the after show for Informed Choice Radio. We're on episode 176. We are now making that rapid rise up to episode 200, which I'm really looking forward to and already starting to make plans for, even though I don't think it's until about May time. But episode 200 will, I promise, be quite special. This is the bit of the episode where I talk about the other stuff. So it's a bit less formal, a bit less structured, and more likely to contain a few more mistakes and less editing. But a few things to talk about in the after show this week. Starting off with this, we have a new logo for Informed Choice Radio. I think it's the third or fourth incarnation of the Informed Choice Radio podcast logo. But I finally bit the bullet and paid a designer to come up with something which was really fresh and clean and eye-catching, because the logo is so important, particularly within the iTunes podcast charts. It's a thing that would encourage people, hopefully, to think, oh, that looks interesting, I'll check that out. So a new logo, you can check it out, of course, at icradio.co.uk. Earlier this week, we started planning for Christmas. I feel terrible even saying that. I had a committee meeting on Monday evening, which was a subcommittee of the Cranley Chamber of Commerce, and we're making plans for the Cranley Christmas light switch on, which is in mid to late November. It's good to start early, but it is a little bit depressing when you're talking about Christmas and the details of the day in middle of February. So it's a while yet to go, but it's good to start early, and I like planning ahead. We've got some really good ideas for this year. I'm going to be responsible once again for the entertainment programme, but we're also hoping to get some sort of continental or German market to come onto the local town square. So really looking forward to that. Lots more meetings coming up over the next few months. We had a photo shoot with some of my clients earlier this week. So what we're in the process of doing, and I think I've mentioned this before, is we're producing a printed client magazine. It's the first time we've done it. But one of our marketing goals, objectives this year is to make what we do a bit more tangible. You know, so much of what we do is online, like this podcast, but blogging, you know, using Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, all the stuff we do on our website, LinkedIn. Very little of what we do is stuff you can touch and feel, and that extends even to our financial planning services. You know, a financial plan is fantastic, and when it's delivered in a paper format, in a bound report, so people have got something to keep. But a lot of it is talking, a lot of it is showing people screens on a big projector. So we wanted to make it more tangible. And the Client Magazine, which is going to be published at the start of March, is part of that. And it's really great to spend some time with a couple of my clients who are going to be the main feature in that Client Magazine, telling the story really of how financial planning has enabled them to have the retirement they wanted. So we took some great photos up here in Cranley on the Common, and I won't ruin the surprise, but it's a good feature, and that'll be out, let's say, at the start of March. Last night, so I'm recording this on Thursday lunchtime. Last night, Wednesday night, we went across to the Cranley Arts Centre for a private view of a new exhibition they have there. It's called Reimagining the Laws of England, and it forms the centrepiece for the second annual Cranley Literary Festival, which we're pleased to be sponsoring here at Informed Choice this year. Reimagining the Laws of England. So the story behind this is there's a set of something called the Halsbury's Statutes, which I believe was 27 books, and they contain every English and Welsh law ever, in force effectively. So 27 quite large volumes. Now, of course, over time, these volumes of law books have moved increasingly online because they get updated. It's a real shame to have to reprint, and imagine quite a big expense to reprint each year. But when this particular volume of statutes went out of print, rather than being recycled or pulped or whatever you do to books, they were donated to the Sidney Nolan Trust, who then engaged with 27 different artists who turned each volume into a work of art based on the laws and the themes of that particular volume. And it was incredible, so much detail in each book and a really interesting interpretation of some of the laws they contained. So that exhibition opened last night with a private view we sponsored, and it's open now to the public free of charge. So if you're in Cranley or passing Cranley, do pop in and take a look at the Cranley Arts Centre for about the next 4 weeks. And it's really worth checking out. Most of the pieces, I have to say, have already been sold. The exhibition's going on tour as part of the 800th anniversary celebrations of the Magna Carta from 1215. So there's a few more places. I believe they're going on to the Hay and Wye Literary Festival after this one, but they're being sold as they go. And actually 2 were sold last night from guests we had along. So a really good evening out, and good to see such a big exhibition coming here to Cranley. We've published a couple of new podcast interviews this week. So on Monday, it was my conversation with Joe Reed, who's a fellow financial planner and author of a new book called Suddenly Single. So that was all about women typically who find themselves suddenly single due to bereavement or divorce. Lots of practical tips in that episode. And then on Wednesday, it was my conversation with Curtis Evans, who is from Fidelity International. Curtis is a fixed income fund manager. And I wanted to chat to Curtis for a while to really find out what the impact of rising interest rates would be on fixed income portfolios, so gilts, corporate bonds, high yield bonds, that sort of thing. So it's a really good conversation. If you're an investor, I'd say it's a must listen to understand how fixed income can now play a part in your portfolio. Tomorrow, on Friday, the day this episode comes out, I've got a day of podcast interviews lined up, and we're now working on episodes to publish in March. So we're working quite a way ahead. We've got lots of people lined up and some really, really interesting guests too. I'm still looking for people to interview. So if you know anybody who has an interest in personal finance or investing story, please do put them in touch and we can schedule something. But I've got some great interview guests to bring you in the future. I'm currently reading a book called The 10X Rule, The Only Difference Between Success and Failure by Grant Cardone. And this is all about the 4th degree of action, as he calls it, which is the level of action that guarantees companies and individuals realize their goals and dreams. It's a bit of a cheesy business motivation book written by one of these business gurus. But I have to say, it's really, really good. It's really motivational. I'm not normally a sucker for these. I don't normally get too excited by the sort of the motivational business books out there. But this one is very well written. I've been reading it as I go to bed each night, and it's been keeping me up quite late because as I read it, I'm getting lots of ideas. I'm then having to make notes and things, and it sort of gets the brain whirring, which is not exactly what you want when you're trying to get to sleep. But I'll have that finished hopefully tonight, and then I can put some of the lessons from that book into action. Coming up on the podcast next week on Monday, I've got an interview with Anne Pettifor. Anne is the author of a new book called The Production of Money. She's a political economist and a very well-renowned political economist who was part of the Jubilee 2000 movement a few years back, which is all about writing off the debt, the national debt, for the poorest countries in the world. An incredible lady. It's a really excellent book as well. So it's a really good conversation with Anne on Monday. And then on Wednesday, I'm speaking to Kalpana Fitzpatrick, who is a blogger and runs a website called Mummy Money Matters. So that's a great listen if you're a mum, if you're a lady who'd like to find out more about things like why women pay more for certain goods and services than men. It's called the pink tax. I've never come across the pink tax before, but Kalpana has a really good explanation for that and some good tips in that podcast too. So until next time, thank you so much for listening to Informed Choice Radio. Please do consider sharing this episode with a friend. And if you've not already done so, just hit that subscribe button in your favourite podcast player, iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or anywhere else you get this. We'll be back on Monday with episode 177, which features that interview with Anne Pettifor.